All right, let's see how this is going to work. Okay, let's see if our sound works. You're not getting any feedback, right?
No.
Okay, good.
Right.
All right. So welcome to Creating the Future Now. And this is with Deborah St Hilaire and Kristine Madera. And, we're here today to talk about envisioning the future. But I want to introduce first Deb St Hilaire, my partner in crime here. And Deb, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Great. I'm the founder of My Body, Mind, Spirit, and I help professional women lead more fulfilling, balanced, and happier lives.
All right. And I'm Kristine Madera, and I am a hypnotherapist and a writer. And my personal mission is to help us create a world where personal and collective well-being is our driving common goal. So we talk about the future and how to create it. And today we're talking about envisioning the future. And I wanted to talk about this, Deb, because as much as we're taught when we are trying to imagine our own future, set our own goals, do that kind of work, we're always taught to really envision the future that we want, to see the whole context of it, and to kind of taste the world that we want to live in, or taste the life that we want to have, and in all of its sensory details. And we've gotten pretty good at that. But what we don't do, and what I think is really sorely lacking, especially on a societal level, is that we tend to operate from reaction. So something happens and we don't want that. Like, we know we don't want that. So we fling over to the other side, and then that doesn't work out either. And then we push back to the other side, and it's this constant zigzag back and forth between, one thing we don't want to the other thing that we choose, because it's not the thing that we don't want, but it's not really what we want. So we don't really sit down and envision a future for ourselves, like collectively, or have conversations about that collective future. It tends to be that side to side, which is getting pretty perilous and old, and kind of running us off a cliff at this point. So I wanted to talk about that. So I wanted to ask you first, like, when you envision your own future, do you also envision the world that you live in that future? Or is it really just about like your future in the world that we have now?
Well, I can't say that I've always envisioned us collectively or globally, because I didn't know to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I started doing this one meditation a few years ago by Vishen Lakiani, and it's called the 6-phase meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And, like we say, it always starts at home, right?
Yeah.
And he tells you to start with yourself, and then go to fill your home, and then fill your city, and then fill your country, and then fill the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what taught me to start doing that. And so now there's so many meditations that you can do that, whether you're doing an unguided one or a guided one. You can start emanating that feeling from inside you, whether it's just an om with the listening to a sound, or
Mm-hmm.
it's a guided one, like what is that one? Protect me, protect those I love, that one.
Oh, the Buddhist prayer. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can spread it globally. And I am convinced that if enough of us do that, not even at the same time, but
Mm-hmm.
at the same time would be awesome, that we can make a difference, because they've proven the vibration, the frequency of groups can actually change things. Whether it's not woo-woo anymore, it's scientifically proven that can happen.
Yeah, it has. So I've done that Vision one as well. And it's really about sort of spreading love, but it's not necessarily about envisioning something specific.
But that's a good place for you to feel that.
Oh, totally.
Out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. but I do think there's something about beginning to envision what that love looks like in a systems level, at a humanity level, what it looks like in action. Because if it just remains a feeling state and we don't have any actions or systems or society that we kind of that are built from that feeling state or from that state of love, then we kind of, it feels good as it's all kind of running off of a cliff. And I think part of the challenge is that, at least for me, because when I've been writing about this in a novel, right? So, well, not this specifically, but I've been writing about it's a near future, semi-protopian young adult fantasy, right? So I'm creating our new world in certain ways. And as I have explored that, some of the issues have been, well, how, if it's a value like personal and collective well-being, what does that look like in action? Like, how is that value expressed through systems and through relationships? And how does it change things on a fundamental level? Because I think if we don't put some thought and effort into imagining what those values of love or whatever it happens to be are expressed in, then we don't really open the possibility of what can be, because we're not expanding our own perception of what can be. So we're always coming in from the same perspective. Oh, but it will be better because then we'll all love each other. But if we all loved each other, how would that change everything? Like, how would that change things? And
how would it change things, Kristine?
That's the big question, because when you look right now at our global value system, our common value is money and power, but money is how it's expressed. Power is variable from place to place, but money is how we express value. And when money is considered value in and of itself, even though it is not, there's no gold standard, there's no actual value attached to money. One of the biggest industries around money is the financial industry, and all it does is create money. It doesn't create anything else. There's no value there. There is only money there. But when that value of money and of making more money and having a return on money is the primary value, the choices made from that are, and then the other half of that value is that it requires, we are all required to be part of that money system in order to survive. Like, there is no survival outside of having the money that each of us needs to survive. So we're all part of this system that has no actual intrinsic value, except for this thing that we call money, which isn't backed by anything except our own faith that money has some kind of value. And so we're all kind of in this human-made system where the primary value is making more money and having enough money to live, even though the behaviors and the activities and the systems that around making money are the same ones that are degrading the soil, that are doing all of the things, not just with global warming and such, but are creating pollution, making toxic water, all these different things, part of this value system around money as being our primary value and our driving value. So it's really depressing. But then when you look at, like, okay, so what if well-being was our value? And I've thought about it in lots of different terms. Like, how could personal and collective well-being be like the bottom line of a balance sheet for a corporation? Like, how, if that was what we measured, because we'd have to figure out ways to measure something, whether it's love or well-being or regeneration or whatever it happens to be, corn futures. It doesn't really matter what it is that you decide is the primary value. You have to find ways to actually measure that. Money is easy to measure, so we measure money. But if you find ways to measure that, then what you decide to measure and how you decide to measure it change every other metric within that. So I always look at it.
That's mind-boggling.
I know. So I always look at, like, what's the driving core value that we're all revolving around? And so, right now it's money, and people think about, well, if we change money and if we are all more loving with money, if everybody had money, but it's not really, money is not really the issue because it doesn't really have any particular value. But what's the value that we're trying to create by making sure everybody has enough money to survive? Isn't that more of a value, like everybody has a right to a sustainable survival?
Right.
You have a right to these kinds of things. And anyway, so that, that's kind of how I envision this. And
And maybe it would help if we had all of our basic needs taken care of, so that we could focus more on consciousness, because all those needs need to be met in order for us. So there's been a study every year about the country that is the happiest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the countries that are the richest that are the happiest, nor is it where you would think there would be an ideal climate. It's usually the Scandinavian countries. This year it was Denmark, I think. Norway or Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
And those two go back and forth quite often. And it's cold there. It's dark there for a great part of the year.
Mm-hmm.
People don't even go outside much because it is so cold. It's not a very wealthy country. And yet it's the happiest. And why? Their health care is provided, their education is provided, their taxes are higher,
mm-hmm.
but nobody complains because all their basic needs are pretty much met. And so that they can focus on personal growth and personal happiness.
Or whatever they're interested in.
Or whatever.
Because some people just are interested in water skiing or snowboarding,
right.
Which is great because then they can do those things.
Right.
But I'm with you. I'd be interested in the other stuff. But it's true. And that's kind of how I set it up in my novel, that there's what's called the universal basic standard of living. That, within every community, there's a kind of a par equilibrium of how people are, fairly equal in what they have within that particular community, and everybody's community is improved, from the ones that have the hardest community standard of living get the first attention, and then things begin to equalize. But it's about education and healthcare and food and shelter and all of these things that you don't have to spend your entire life working just to get those things, or not even being able to get those things now. Even here,
mm-hmm.
middle class people are homeless and they 2 jobs and they can't afford a place to live. But then you can spend your time and energy doing more productive things for society. And then the other half of that for me, when it comes to that money standpoint, is that then people don't have to do things that are unnecessary and ridiculous. So how much money and time and effort, natural resources, all of these things are used up, or people have to engage in to make stuff that nobody really wants, but is a way to make money.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we didn't have to waste our time trying to make money in ever more ridiculous ways, we could do something like clean up pollution, or do something else.
Ridiculous ways. Look at the advertisements on TV.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And the medication ones are the worst ones.
Oh yeah.
Here's this 5-foot-long list of side effects, but ask your doctor.
Well, and all the crap, like if you look around your house, how much of the stuff around your house is stuff that like you don't even like or need or want, but it was cute at the store, or somebody gave you this kitschy little thing and you got to put it on a shelf in case over, because then they'll wonder what it's at. It's not there. Or all this stuff that we make that doesn't even work. That, if we had a little more higher criteria about what was allowed to be produced, not because something made money, but because it makes sense. That, it's been demonstrated that like stuff as long as you have your basic needs met, like all the more and more stuff doesn't make you happy. Even more and more choice doesn't make you happy. Like, there's all this thing about, well, freedom is choice. Like we need to have as many possible choices as we can. But they've actually shown that creates a lot of anxiety. And I know when I was in the Peace Corps, because when I was in the Peace Corps, we had, in our village, if there was peanut butter, you bought it. Didn't matter if it's crunchy or smooth or big jar, small jar, didn't matter. So, but you bought it because, my gosh, it was peanut butter, and what a great break in the cow and greens that we had all the time. So when we got home, my husband and I, like, we put on a backpack and we walked to the grocery store in California where everybody looked at us like we were crazy. And then walked into the store and I was going to buy peanut butter. And I went in and there was 40 different kinds of peanut butter. And I went catatonic with anxiety over how the criteria I would need to choose the peanut butter that I wanted. And I left with no peanut butter. It was ridiculous.
Right.
Now that I'm used to it, I know exactly what peanut butter I would want to buy. But more choice does not necessarily make us happier.
That's right. And think about when we were children, how many cereals were there?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe 10.
Yeah.
And that's pushing it. And now, I mean, I feel sorry for children that have to make that huge, here, pick a cereal. And there's a wall of cereal.
Yeah, there is.
Wow. You're absolutely right. It's unnecessary. And it's true with everything. Everything is oversupplied.
Yeah. And in this era we're all in a shortage because there's the supply chain stuff, but there's too much of all kinds of stuff. But so when I look at envisioning the future, like it can get almost like too much choice to look at every little single thing on its own. So I look to, what is the core value that you as an individual or us collectively would want to create a society around? And how does that core value look, not just in the things that you agree with, but in the things that you don't agree with? Like, if the value in and of itself is important, whether it's freedom or well-being or, whatever it happens to be, how do you express that value in a way that that works for everybody, that actually creates a regenerative society, or that actually creates a society that people would want to live in? And I think if you look at it from a value perspective, it's easier to have some consistency within a society and have something measurable. Again, we talk in America about the Constitution. We always have to measure things against the Constitution, which of course is its own problem. But if you have a particular small core set of values and you were consistent about applying those, you can always look and see, well, how does this line up with these 4 or 5 values, and how is it equitable throughout, the expression in that society? So that's what I think about when I think about envisioning the future. Not so much how I would like the future to look for me, but how would I like, what is the primary value I would want that future to have, and how might that express itself?
Something that I think about as a nutritional consultant, and we were talking about the grocery store. In my ideal grocery store, there would be nothing but healthy choices. And there would be maybe 3, a no sugar one, like peanut butters, a no sugar one, a chunky one, and a smooth one. With nothing else in it, just peanuts and maybe a little bit of oil. And it would be like that with everything, so that you didn't have to read the labels with all those words that you don't know what it is. All those substitute words that they've created for sugar, when they know that it's hurting people.
Well,
and our government knows that food additives aren't good for us. They know that.
Yeah.
And in other countries, and I'm not just dissing the United States, but a government would act and deliver in the best interest of the people's health, wealth, and welfare.
Right. Yeah.
And to me, that would be ideal because we can't really go without a government.
I don't know.
But we could self-govern in pockets, I guess. But then would disagreements cause wars?
Well, okay, so that goes to an either or sort of thing. Like, I think that people are much, especially in this age of internet and stuff, that given the right tools, we would be able to do a much better job of self-governing than we might have been able to do before. And certainly if we had values that we agreed on, because like you were saying with food, when the primary value is money making for corporations, then all kinds of stuff gets put in peanut butter because it needs preservatives. It needs different flavors. There need to be jelly in the peanut butter. We need to put honey in the peanut butter. We need all these different things we need to put in the peanut butter. And we need to make it addictive so that people buy the same peanut butter. And it's not quite as much for peanut butter as it is for some other products, but the configuration of sugar, fat, salt is done to really, feed that addictive cycle in the brain. So that works great for business, not so great for consumers. Exactly. So like you were talking, if the primary value for products was the well-being of the consumer, or the well-being of the consumer and the planet, and you had that built into it, you'd have whole different products than you do when it's to sell the most bottles of that peanut butter to the most possible people.
Right. And people and corporations would still be able to make money, but not at our expense, not at the expense of our health and our welfare. It would all be more balanced, that they wouldn't be making that much money, they'd be making this much money, enough to survive, enough to live well within that societal complex. And maybe if every product was like that, like, okay, say clothes, if it was an all cotton, there wouldn't be any synthetics. And I think that would be great. And that would be great for everybody. But what about all the people that make synthetics? What would happen to them?
Well, I think when you begin to look at, again, you come at it from a particular kind of value, like for me, it's about well-being, personal and collective well-being. So if the personal and collective well-being is that, we create clothing that is environmentally sustainable and beneficial, and people like it, it's comfortable, it doesn't use synthetics or harsh dyes, or doesn't go through all those chemical processes and that kind of stuff, then you've got certain amounts of clothing. But you don't, like, it still comes back to, then for me, sorry, I'm rambling on this.
No,
for me, it's not like, what would those other people do that would be out of business, or because it wouldn't be based on how much money everybody could make. So like my book that I'm working on, it's really that like all of these things are kind of part of projects, and they're sort of decided on this complex set of things that are good for the planet, helpful for people, blah, 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 all these things. But that what you have as an individual is you have your universal basic standard of living, and you contribute 15 or so hours per week to, the whole universal well-being system, or universal basic standard of living system. And the rest of the time is your own. So you can then work on other projects if you want to, that can make you and mine, I took money away because it was too complicated. So I did it as like a kind of complex exchange system that's managed by like artificial intelligence or something. But that really, you have the time dividend. If you don't have to spend all of your time working to survive, and if we have so much less that we have to do because we're not having to engage in profit-making activities just to survive, like, and we can eliminate all the crap.
Right.
So if you take away all the crap, then you've got a lot less work that needs to be done. And if people distribute that work more evenly, then everybody can do less work. Everything that needs to get done gets done. And everybody has more time to either do personal development or snowboard, or
so there would be like communal gardens and communal Yes, very good. I like that. And the other thing is that if a company was making, let's say, synthetic
Mm-hmm.
sheets, let's pretend like synthetic sheets,
Okay.
and nobody was buying them because we want cotton, it would be our demand that would create what the companies made. Just like in grocery stores, there used to be such a tiny little um, health food, for lack of a
Mm-hmm.
better word. It's not
Right.
always health food, but such a little tiny health food area. Now look how big it is. And it was because the consumers demanded it.
Right. Right.
So if we all took that attitude of less is more, healthier is better,
Mm-hmm.
and we demanded that, it could potentially go that way, couldn't it?
It could, but I think some other things would have to change as well, because when the driver of everything becomes how much money you make,
Right.
then you have things like where they will not put if something is genetically modified on a package because somebody might not choose it because it's got genetically modified ingredients. Or they'll use the word natural, like natural that doesn't mean
Oh,
a dang
yes.
thing, but in
Yes.
people's mind, oh, it's natural, it must
It's
be
a
good.
buzzword. That's
So
right.
there's a lot of manipulation that goes on to try to feed people's, to match products with people's desires that actually aren't what they are supposed to be. Don't actually meet what those desires are. So again, in mine, I've eliminated corporations just out of ease. But yeah, I think that if there was more transparency and more honesty, and that's part of it. Like I
Boy,
think,
that's a huge part of it.
yeah, in a
And
society
more
that
feminine energy.
and more feminine energy, yes. But if you have more transparency so that if you knew, like if people could say, hey, I really don't like genetically modified food. And so if this 40% of food is genetically modified and that stops being bought, then genetically modified food would go away. And we could, and having a preference really could make a difference. But when it comes down to, oh, well, the genetically modified people, like they're paying us a lot of money to be sure that they stay in business. So we need to be sure that nobody knows that there's any genetically modified ingredients in their food. So, we just take away that level of transparency and choice.
Right.
And just tell people, well, this is what you're getting. It's fine. It's all natural. It's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, to me, there's a lot of layers of it. And when you come down to, and it again comes down to the values, like everything that is dysfunctional in our society can come back to that real core value, because we've got like these core values that we talk about, all freedom and liberty and the American dream, whatever that is anymore, and all this kind of stuff. But the real value is money, and how much money and how much money and power, basically. So
and it's how everybody's measured.
Yeah.
Successfully.
Yep.
If you're successful, you have a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do. And so because of that, it's how we measure ourselves.
Yes. So when everything gets measured by that value, we get, the government that's paid for by money. We get the society that's driven by money. We get people who are excluded from basic life because they don't fit into the ability to make money the way that traditionally is. Like I used to work in a homeless shelter, and the women there, they were certainly, most of them, from reasonably to very intelligent. But and a lot of them, the barrier to be able to work in a 40-hour work week and following this rule and following this rule and following this rule and following this rule just didn't work for them. They had migraines. They couldn't, they could only work maybe half the days. They were living in their car, so they couldn't get ready for a job. So they were systematically and always outside of that system. Because they didn't fit into the mold that you had to fit into to be successful in that system. So everything radiates from that core value. So if you have a core value like, healthy living or well-being or, mutual respect or whatever other value that is, when it becomes the core, everything begins to reflect that core value. And it radiates through everything, but you have to create the system to reflect the value. It's harder, I think, to take a value and apply it to a system like that we have now. Because it would be
Yes.
like, well, yeah, well-being is terrific, but I have to make a profit. So it still comes down to that. Like, yeah, it's better than, putting a bunch of synthetic ingredients in peanut butter. But, if you're still measuring it in terms of profit, well-being is always secondary to it. And I like to use the example of like clean water. Like everybody thinks clean water is a great idea until somebody has to pay for it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, you see that the value of clean water comes down to the money. It's not about the value of clean water itself. And so that's the kind of thing that you have to disentangle when we think about a future that we want, to look at things not from this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece, but how do we actually simplify it by creating a different value set that we live by?
And I think, in my opinion, I think a lot of people don't even realize that you can create your own future. No. Because we're really not taught that in our educational system. There's a quote by Peter Drucker that says, the only way to predict your future is to create it. Mm-hmm. And I love that. And that's his whole teaching, is how to create your own future. And collectively, if we all want the same thing, and you can't just sit back and wish. No. You actually have to start taking steps. And in order to do that, we need to be surrounded by the right people. We need to have the right people in place in government that want to break it down. I don't even know how you're writing this book. I mean, to me, there would be so many things. And I don't want to say there's so many things that are wrong, because I try not to focus on that.
Right, yeah.
Because there are a lot of good things and there are a lot of good people.
Oh, sure.
But by contrast, I know we learn and grow by contrast, but I don't know, there would have to be so many changes, societal changes, for us to evolve into even close to what you're thinking. How far in the future is this book?
I have it in kind of a non-specific way. Right now, it's kind of 30, 35 years post-pandemics. I put pandemics because God knows how many we're going to have. We have monkeypox now, and there's another respiratory virus for kids, and there's a liver disease for kids. I mean, it's crazy. So who knows how long this will last? But it was really, as I was thinking about this, and this was, this is how novels work for me, is I'll have a character that just kind of hangs out and says, "Hi, I'm here," and then I'm trying to. And then these stories a little bit forms and stuff. But during COVID, I was really interested in the initial story that came with this character, about how because this character lived in a different version of a different future version than the trajectory that we seem to be on. And it was really a value of like personal and collective well-being. And so I walked for 6 months over just around my community thinking, well, how could you possibly make personal and collective well-being a core value? Like what? And I for a long time, I just was mystified, because I was sort of in this box of what we have now, and how do we change this into that, or how do we supplant that into this? And I couldn't do it really. So I kind of just created or listened to what that society was, and then tried to imagine the bridge between here and there. And it's a fictional book, obviously. So I don't know if anything it was a little radical.
We can hope,
here and there.
We can hope.
But really what it ended up being is that things got dysfunctional enough, and there were a few leaps in technology enough that people were able to make new choices based on different values collectively. And it built up from there. It's not like it wholesale was like, well, we're all going to be doing this now. It was more like, well, we're starting from here and we're going to create this outward. And it was,
so I could see that happening. But you know what? That really is already happening, I think.
I do too.
The people that are moving to live off grid, they're choosing that different lifestyle. And if enough people do that, what you're saying, I think where you don't have to depend on those big companies for your needs.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even during the pandemics and now and I think it's accelerating now, but during the pandemics when people had been used to, not knowing their neighbors and their life was like out their home and then their work and then, their virtual world, and people got to know their neighbors and were starting checking on their neighbors, and they were sharing vacuum cleaners because you couldn't get anything, and so these little micro communities were springing up from your physical neighbors, but also from other kinds of communities. These little micro communities of different kinds of support were coming up, and I think
that's very true.
Yeah. And now that we've got these supply chain issues and inflation and, people are going to have to do more car sharing and, all this kinds of stuff. I remember the car sharing back in the 70s, 4 people in your car. So that and the diamond lanes and all that kind of stuff that came from that. But that as life is getting harder to live, people are turning to their neighbors in their community to do more sharing and to do more mutual support. And I think when we do that and we become more connected that way, and we begin to disconnect from these other influences to the degree that we can say, wow, I so much prefer the connection of community over this disconnection of, all of these other aspects of life, that then we do begin to have different expectations. I mean, just like in how the pandemic changed schools and it changed work, and schools are going back more to the way that they were, but people are like, yeah, done with that kind of work, not doing that anymore.
That's right.
That's changing. So in my view, if we can be a little more intentional about what we want to create individually and collectively, it might be a smoother road than the haphazard back and forth lurching from side to side that we often have.
Right. I like that. Well, I'm going to be looking forward to reading this book.
Oh, me too. When it's done.
It's going to be interesting. And you're right. And I'm a firm believer that you meet people when you should meet them, the right time and all that. And it's happening more and more now globally because of the internet. Mm-hmm. So ideas are shared more broadly now. Yeah. So you can find the people that think like you, even though they might not be right around you. But the good thing is, like you said, it's almost cyclical to where we do depend, and maybe depend is the wrong word. We do commune with our neighbors more than we used to. Mm-hmm. The year that the pandemic was in full force, there were more people using our beach than ever before. All the people that live here, instead of going away, were actually using our beach, and there were umbrellas and families playing, and it was so cool. And it's like that again this year. Mm-hmm. So it kind of came around full circle to where they're taking advantage of what they have instead of going away, which is good.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And I do, you brought up the internet, which it has been easier and pretty strong for communities that have an ideal like hatred, and having an ideal like, of wanting to, harm other people. They found each other too. And it can be easier to trigger those emotions and then give a target for those emotions and, bring, there's the white supremacists, there's all these different groups of people that are trying to force their views on other people. So there's that aspect as well. And I think it's not being used as well or as effectively for people who want to create something new, because it's always hard to create something new. It is easy to tap into the nervous system and, make somebody hate somebody else, or make them angry about somebody else and say, this is the person that you're angry about, because that's already there. You just have to give voice to a target and point and say, shoot, or whatever you happen to be with that. But it is harder to create together because it has to become a cooperative vision, or it has to become, something that has room for different viewpoints and expansion and exploration and, and synergy and some of these ideas that we can open up and begin to create
and
together.
it's there. It can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's possible.
Anything can be misused, and is it because we're human, or is it because our society has created that? I don't know the answers to that. And it's really sad sometimes when I think of how the world was, and I see it going back to that. I think it is cyclical, to that innocent world where, and maybe it was because the news was different. Maybe it was because our values as a society were different. And it was before they were adding a lot of chemicals for shelf life. And it was before people were giving our beef so many antibiotics and hormones. But who's it up to change that?
Yeah. And, when I look back at that, it does seem like, and I think every generation looks back at the time where it seemed most peaceful. But if I look back to when I was a kid, there was the political assassinations. There were, riots and all kinds
of
and there's always been something. And when I think back to that, because people say, well, how did all these new people come? I'm like, and it's not that all these new people with new ideas came, they were always there. We just only had room for this. And now, people who've never were included in that are saying, hey, I'm a person too. I deserve to be counted. I deserve to matter. And I think it's important that everybody matters and that everybody is included and has a place. And yeah, of course, that's going to cause some backlash. And of course, it makes it a really big world to look out and say, wow, there's so much out here. And I thought it was only this big.
Right.
But I think that's part of that movement going forward. And of course, the internet connects people one with the other for better or for worse. But I do see that it is also a forum in which, people can find like-minded visionaries and begin to, even if you're not building a physical community, but begin to talk about, what's possible in terms other than we need to change A, B, C, D, E, F, and G and pass all these laws and all this, because none of that really is going to work unless we're really open to a shift in the spirit of that law change and not just some kind of, punitive way of controlling somebody else. Right. So to me, the movement forward is one that invites us with inspiration and aspiration, and not with, pointing fingers and shaming people into acting certain ways, no matter who it is, because both sides are doing that. So anyway, I kind of see it as an aspirational movement forward. I just don't think we have found the set of values or the people or the mechanism to fuel that aspiration yet, but I have high hopes that we will.
Right. But the more that it's talked about and seeds are planted for that, the more likely it is to come about. So
I think so.
I admire you for even presenting this for us to talk about, because I don't know, I just don't think enough people think that it's possible, and maybe it's not possible, but if you don't take steps yourself to become more accepting, more open, more loving, more gracious, more universal, then it's never going to happen. It all really does happen first here.
Yeah, it does.
And I think, and by you even mentioning it and bringing it up starts a whole new train of thought, and it's a good thing. So thanks.
Okay. Well, you're welcome. And I do think one of the hard parts of this is that, we want everything to be great right away.
Yes.
And everything's always a work in progress. It is us doing our part right now so that the people who come after us can build on that, and that they build on something positive. They build in a direction that moves us forward, that increases freedom, that increases love, it increases community, that increases access to survival for more people. So I don't think it's unless something really catastrophically huge shakes things up, it really does seem more of an incremental step. So if we can be willing to take those incremental steps so that we're laying the groundwork for something better, and so the kids that come after us can say, hey, I'm starting from here and not from here, just like our grandmothers. Like my grandma was born at a time where they didn't have the vote, and they did these little suffragette things. And then, now, at least for the moment, we have the vote as women. And so we're building on it from there. We've got more women in leadership positions, so it may be slow and there may be some back and forth, but we're building on the efforts that came earlier. And I think
that's what we have to focus on.
Yeah.
The good that's being done, the positive ways that we're going. Yes, I agree.
All right.
Well, this was very interesting, Kristine.
Yeah, I'm glad we did this one. This was fun. And so look forward to our next one, and know that your choices create your future. So you want to choose wisely.
Yes. See you next time.
Bye-bye. All right. Let's see how we figure this out.